and welcome to another Nature Note. Now, this week our theme is all about starry nights, so I thought what better time than to share a constellation naming story. Now, the constellations have been around for a really long time, but at some point in the history of the world, people from different cultures looked up and said, that looks a lot like a bear or a W or a swan, and they came up with stories to explain why those constellations are there. And that was so many years ago that those stories have become ingrained in those cultures. As you may know, the land that is now Camp Kawartha was originally cared for by the Ojiig'anung and the Chippewa peoples. The story we're going to hear this week is from another group of indigenous peoples that lived very close to where Camp Kawartha is now. And they lived very close to the Ojiig'anung and the Chippewa. So this is an Anishnaabe creation story. Now the Anishnaabe are indigenous peoples that were the original peoples on a lot of the land in Ontario. For example, the Mississauga Anishnaabe of Peterborough, which is pretty close to camp if you are aware. Now the best way to hear a story about indigenous peoples is to have it be told to you by an indigenous storyteller. But another good way is to read a story that was written by an indigenous person. So this story that I'm about to read you is a creation story about the Big Dipper, and it was written by Joseph Bruchak and Michael Caduto. But something to keep in mind is that they didn't create this story. This story was passed down to them through generations and generations. And the title of the story is How Fisher Went to the Skyland. Long ago, when the world began, before the humans came, there was nothing but winter. And winter had spread far across the land. The trees were bowed down with snow, the leaves were brown, and the few berries and fruit that grew soon withered and died. The rivers and lakes were ice, and those that lived in them suffered, and many of them died. Those animals that survived had to be the best of hunters, and the best hunter of them all was Fisher, for he lived on both the land and the water, and could run upon the frozen land and swim through the icy water. But Fisher had a child, a son, and Fisher's son was too young to be as good as a hunter as his father. Days passed and he found no food, and then, at last, he saw something to eat. A squirrel, who was so busy searching in the snow for nuts to eat that he did not seem to hear the sound or smell of Fisher's son coming closer and closer and closer. And then the Fisher's son pounced. He grabbed hold of the squirrel and was about to bite when Squirrel said, "Stop! If you don't eat me, I'll give you some very good advice." So Fisher's son stopped, and the squirrel said, "You want more food to eat?" "Yes," said the Fisher's son. "Then you must ask your father to help," said Squirrel. "Your father is the only one who can go to Skyland and bring back summer, to bring light and warmth and food for us all." "What must I do?" said Fisher, and the squirrel told him what to do. That night, Fisher's son returned to their den, and sat and wept and wept. He refused to tell his mother why he was crying. Fisher returned and offered his son a fish to eat, but still he cried and cried, until at last Fisher asked, "Why are you crying?" "Because, father, you're the only one who can go to Skyland and bring us summer, and you will not go. Please, father, go to Skyland and save us all." Fisher looked at his son. "This is a very dangerous thing you ask of me, but I will go, but I cannot go alone." And so Fisher went to his friends, Wolf, Lynx, and Otter, and they agreed to help. And together they set off across the frozen landscape. Wolf, Fisher, and Otter running, their feet paddling across the snow, Lynx leaping from tree to tree. Until at last they came to a mountain that seemed to stretch up into the sky. They paused for a while to rest, and when they began climbing, Wolf, Fisher, and Otter leapt from rock to rock. Lynx darted from tree to tree. Up and up they climbed until they reached the top, and they could see the sky above them, and they could feel the warmth of summer hidden amongst the clouds. "Come on," cried Fisher. "We must make a hole in the sky to break through to the land above." Otter jumped up and struck the sky, but he could not break through. Lynx jumped next, but his claws just scratched the surface of the sky. And then Wolf leapt again and again and again, and with his claws he gouged a hole through the sky, and sunlight flooded in. But it wasn't enough to melt the snow, so Wolf leapt through the hole, carrying Otter in his jaws. Lynx leapt into the sky and hauled Fisher up with him. The animals were tiring, and so they dug and scratched and clawed at the hole as fast as they could. The sunlight flooded past them and into the land below. They could see the snow begin to melt and the water begin to flow. But then they heard footsteps thundering towards them. "Save yourselves," shouted Fisher. "I will distract them." And he ran off, shouting and taunting the sky people, who chased after him. Lynx, wolf, and otter jumped through the hole in the sky to safety in the land below. And when they looked back up to the sky, where was Fisher? They looked up and saw the sky people chasing after Fisher. As they got closer and closer, Fisher climbed up a tree, hurling himself from branch to branch until he reached the top of the tree where the sky people could not follow. "He's safe," thought the watchers down below, but one of the sky people had a bow and shot Fisher down from the tree, and he fell, tumbling towards the ground. As he fell, the Creator looked down. He saw the sacrifice that Fisher had made to save his friends, and so he took pity on Fisher. And so Fisher never struck the ground, but instead the Creator picked him up and placed him amongst the stars. And you can still see him today, the pattern of stars that we call Fisher, high in the sky. And every year you can see Fisher cross the sky to begin the long journey to bring summer to Earth once again. That concludes our story for tonight. Thank you all for joining me for this nature note. I hope you have a great evening, sleep well, and if you get a chance to, take a look at the stars. You might see something cool. Bye-bye!